On April 11, in the year 1915, 4 of us, Boy Scouts, and our leader left St. Paul, Minnesota on an official Boy Scout hike to the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco. In the picture, our number 1 is our leader, H.S. Sorrells. We called him Lieutenant. Number 2 is Lehun Lehert. Number 3, my brother, Harry Marcellus. Number 4, Max Bernstein. And number 5, myself, Fred Marecellus. The reason my brother Harry and I joined the hike was that in 1912, our dad sold our farm near Foreman, North Dakota. He intended that we would move to California. However, Dad died the next fall, which left us, Mother, Lillian, Harry, and me with no home and wanting to move to California. Our farm was a nice place with all farm equipment, including this Northwest threshing outfit. This slide shows Harry, the engineer, our sister Lillian, standing there by the bow wheel of the engine. I took the picture with my number 2 Brownie box camera. This was in the fall of 1912, the last year on the farm. Now about the hike. This slide poorly shows the St. Paul Daily News send-off article. The St. Paul mayor is giving Sorrells a letter to the mayor of San Francisco. Boys of the Curly Troop of North St. Paul, of which Harry and I were members, built the cart. The Commercial Club of St. Paul outfitted us with a 12 by 14 waterproof tent, ponchos, cots, and camping gear. They also had signs made for each side of the cart. The Kiddo Shoe Company supplied us each with 2 pairs of good sturdy shoes. We each were to take turns writing a story for the Sunday issue of the St. Paul Daily News. This was to help finance the trip, since we were to start with only $10 each. Here we are on the second day out. Harry was chosen chief cook for the trip, and I was elected the official photographer. I had my number 2 Brownie box camera, and an aunt loaned me a postcard-sized Kodak for part of the trip. The cart signs were not ready, but were sent to us a few days later. They didn't make color slides in those days, so to make the slides I am showing, I photographed the black and white pictures which I took. I also photographed a few postcards to make slides of them. Stopped here for lunch on the bank of the river near Northfield, Minnesota. We call this Camp Deluxe. It was the first camp in the state of Iowa. We were invited to camp in their yard near the house. They loaned us an extension cord and an electric light. Normally we used a Coleman lantern for light. When our cart signs arrived, we had pictures taken of the group and had postcards made to sell to better help finance the trip. Here we are on the Lincoln Highway near Nevada, Iowa. This is what we called 9 blocks of mud. We had to literally wade through the mud up this steep hill when leaving Des Moines, Iowa. Incidentally, we stopped at the Capitol in Des Moines to visit the governor. He gave us a letter to present to the president of the exposition in San Francisco. We also got letters from the governor of each state whose capital we went through. The first day in Missouri, we came by the Jacobsons' home. The Jacobsons learned about us coming, and as we came along, they were there in the road and insisted that we come in for some ice cream. Of course, we accepted, but when we got in the house, there was a chicken dinner all on the big table ready for us to eat. It proved to be one of the most enjoyable occasions of the entire trip. Here, watching a little sawmill in Missouri. They were sawing oak logs from the forest there. Entering Kansas City, crossing the Missouri River over the new bridge. Notice the horse and buggy up ahead with a cow tied on behind. At Kansas City, we camped up on the hill overlooking the new railroad depot. We were in Topeka, Kansas on Memorial Day, and they insisted we enter the parade. From Kansas City, we headed west over the Golden Belt route to Denver, but when we got to Lawrence, Kansas, it had been raining so hard that the Kansas River there was at flood stage. We waited for the river to recede, but it kept rising, so we finally left and waited in the floodwaters for several miles. But as the water got waist deep, we had to take to the railroad, which was alongside the road. It was a double track, and we had to lift the cart from one track to the other as the trains came along. Once, trains were coming from each direction at the same time. We saw a crossing shortly up ahead and just got the cart off in time. Finally, at the little Williamstown station, we loaded the cart in an empty boxcar there, had it shipped to Topeka. We then walked the tracks to Topeka, and the road alongside was under deep water most of the way. The railroad tracks only about a foot above water in places. I thoughtlessly left the cameras in the cart, so got no pictures of the flood. When we came near this rock salt mine at Canopolis, we went over there to see if we could go in it. After considerable persuasion, we got permission. One of the officials took us down. It felt like the elevator nearly dropped us the 800 feet to the bottom. It was beautiful down there, and the many columns of rock salt which were left for support of the mine ceiling were so pure they were nearly clear like glass. This is our cousin Charles Hubbs's place at Dorrance, Kansas. Harry and I went to see them, and they insisted we go bring the others and stay 2 or 3 days. So we did, and set up the tent in their yard. However, they insisted that Harry and I stay in the house. We stayed there 3 days, playing croquet, baseball, and singing. also eating lots of homemade ice cream and the wonderful home-cooked meals. The Hubbses had several girls about our ages, so we had a grand time and certainly hated to leave. This is one of several western Kansas sod houses that we saw along the way. At noon on July 9th, we crossed into Colorado and thought then that we really were getting somewhere. And a day later, we got our first view of the mountains. Could see Pikes Peak way off in the distance. However, it doesn't show in this slide. Then on July 17, we set up camp here in Denver City Park. A Boy Scout from Denver came out to meet us and showed us where to camp. It was near the big Denver Zoo. A little later, Mr. Shepard, a city scout leader, came in his car and took us down to the free baths where we had a swim in the big pool. The next day, we visited the zoo and museum. Mr. Shepard came again and took us on a grand tour of the city and countryside. In all, we were in Denver a week and was treated royally all the time. A few days later, we got to Colorado Springs and were met by a lady in an auto who showed us where to camp here on a vacant lot in the residence district. The next day, Harry and I took a streetcar to the Garden of the Gods in Manitou. There we climbed to the very top of the tallest of the cathedral spires. Harry took this picture of me standing up there. In 1958, Grace and I drove to Colorado and on our return followed some of the route of our scout hike of 1915. I shall show a few color slides that I took on this trip in 1958. This is the cathedral spire that we climbed and I stood on top of in 1915. The whole group of cathedral spires. These are called the Gateway Rocks. A very famous landmark, the Balanced Rock in the Garden of the Gods. We moved to Manitou and set up camp in the tourist camp there. The next evening, we started the hike up Pikes Peak, following the cog railway tracks all the way up. It is a very steep grade, and it took us nearly all night. Arriving here at the summit house just at daybreak as the cog rail car got there. Over half of the people who got off the car fainted and lay down on the floor in the summit house. We lay down there too and slept for a while. I took a picture or two and we started hiking down. Shortly after we left Manitou, going up the Ute Pass route, we came to the Rainbow Falls. The man there loaned us raincoats and told us to come and see the falls. The Rainbow Falls. A view of the old Ute Pass Road that we hiked over in 1915. Another view of the old road. The old road and the new bridge at Rainbow Falls. Pikes Peak as viewed from the top of Ute Pass, August 3, 1915. Camp Buena Vista, Colorado. A pretty lake near Leadville. Since we had never seen mountains before, us boys were thrilled with the sight of them and all the beautiful scenery around here. Mount Elbert, over 14,000 feet high, the highest mountain in the Rockies. On our 1958 trip, we came by this sign, so stopped and Grace took the picture of me looking at the old road we hiked over in 1915. An old bridge that we also hiked over. This slide shows the mine hill back of Leadville in the year 1915. Leadville is a famous mining town of the Rockies. We visited the Yak mine there, and they took us in on a mining train. It was a very exciting ride. After several minutes, we got off and were taken around to see the engine room, the big ventilating fans, and the hoisting engines. When the elevator was ready, we got on and was literally dropped down the cold shaft to the 1,200-foot level. There we watched the men working the air drills, and in another place, the dynamite was all wired up ready for blasting. We were taken around a lot and given nice samples of silver ore as we left. The next day, at the big smelter, we saw molten silver being cast into bars. The red-hot waste, molten rock, was hauled out in cars and dumped. The big Leadville smelter. The Leadville mines have produced about 600 million in silver, gold, and other metals. Leadville, Colorado, as in 1958. At Leadville, Max Bernstein and Leon Bleekhart decided not to pull the cart anymore, leaving the party and go it on their own. This shows them the way they continued on. It was a friendly separation, and we saw them again in Glenwood Springs, Salt Lake City, Reno, and Donner Lake, and San Francisco. Late the next day, we crossed over Tennessee Pass at 10,424 feet elevation. It didn't seem too hard pulling the cart with only the three of us. This shows some of the old road we hiked over in 1915. Notice how narrow it was. The railroad tracks were way down below here at Minturn, but the road finally got down there. We camped at Pendo Station down by the tracks, and I took a couple of pictures of the Denver and Rio Grande Malay engines. The engines were monsters and really snorted when going up the Tennessee Pass. This was our first view of the Canyon of the Grand, Colorado. We thought it very beautiful and camped here near the entrance for the night. We enjoyed hiking through the Canyon of the Grand very much, one of the beauty spots of the hike. A few miles past the canyon, we came to Glenwood Springs. Set up camp in the tourist park, and in the morning there were the other two scouts, Max and Leon, not far away. While at Glenwood Springs, we enjoyed swimming in the big hot springs pool. While there also, we had this new picture taken of just the three of us with the cart, and had postcards printed to last us for the rest of the hike. We came through this little canyon called Plateau Creek Canyon. It had all kinds of odd formations in it. This and the next two pictures are color slides that I took in 1958 of this area. Peach orchards at Palisade, Colorado. When on the hike, we filled up on peaches here. Also, when on the hike, it rained, so we camped under the bridge there. We called this Camp Lonesome at Grand Junction, Colorado, because to make the load lighter, and thinking we would not need the big tent much more, we shipped it and some other gear to Salt Lake City. This is how lonesome we looked and felt crossing the eastern desert of Utah. It was a very long, tiring trip. A Denver and Rio Grande train out on the desert. It was about the only thing we saw out there. Here Harry is getting water out of the Green River, Utah. We camped under the bridge seen in the distance. A few miles up in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, near Helper, is this big rock called Castle Gate. Rock formations along the road near the top of the Wasatch Range. It was nearly dark as we reached the top, and we hadn't eaten dinner yet. I gathered wood and built a fire, but found out the next day, as I started to swell up, that I had probably used poison oak wood for the fire. The next day, I couldn't walk, so got in the cart, and Harry and Lieutenant had to pull me most of the way to Salt Lake City. We stayed in the desert gym there, where Mr. Taylor, the scout executive, told us to stay. Slept on the floor between gym pads. This is the way I looked the next day, all puffed up and ready and really in bad shape. While pulling the cart up to the gym, a couple of boys came out to meet us, and were we surprised to see that they were Max and Leon. who were staying there also. We were told by the Salt Lake City Commercial Club that the roads across the desert were in terrible shape and that we could never make it with the cart. So we shipped the cart and most of our camping gear to Reno. Then Harry and I camped here in the tourist park a few days. In all, we were in Salt Lake City 2 weeks. Lieutenant, once being a railroad man, got a pass to Reno. I got a ride to Reno with these people who were camping near us in Salt Lake City. Mr. and Mrs. Snipe and their young boy Ralph. They were driving from North Carolina to Portland, Oregon in a 7-passenger Studebaker touring car. They had a little dog named Ted with them. They left Salt Lake City September 21. Harry stayed there hoping to get a ride with someone else. The roads really were in terrible shape. Here, changing a tire. They had 9 flat tires on the way to Reno, and it took us 9 days to make it. We met this team in wagons on those terrible roads, and the driver made us get out of the way. In places, it seemed there were hundreds of rabbits, and the dog, Ted, would go wild chasing them. This one must have thought he was hid, but I got his picture anyway. Here, Mrs. Snipe is getting breakfast out on the desert. Ralph took the picture with my Brownie camera. The Snipes had their tent, canvas, and blankets, but slept on the ground. I had only my poncho and slept out on the ground with my clothes on. It was mighty cold some nights. I left my blanket with Harry. In many places, the powdery white dust was over a foot deep, and it would slosh over the running boards of the car, and at times the radiator would plow into it. Mr. Snipe had to drive in low gear for many, many miles. On the 9th day from Salt Lake City, as we approached Reno, the roads were good, and the countryside was beautiful. They parked on the Truckee River in Reno. The Snipes bade me goodbye at Reno and went on. Before long, I met Lieutenant. He was sure happy to see me, not knowing where I was. I got a card from Harry and learned that he was coming. We stayed in Reno 4 days, sleeping in the gym in the YMCA on gym pads. Sold our postcards to make money and got our cart from the depot. This was our first camp in California, and how thrilled we were to be here. Lieutenant and I left Reno with the cart on the 5th morning there, and left a card notifying Harry that we had gone on. Camped here at Donner Lake one night and rested all the next day. Max and Leon came by while we were here, and we had quite a visit. We were thrilled when we got here to the top of Donner Summit. Was so afraid the pass might get snowed in before we got here. The old grade was pretty steep, 20% or better, We couldn't pull the cart up the grade, so waited in hopes a man with a team of horses and wagon might come along. Sure enough, there one came, and the man told us to tie the cart on and help push. Before long, I looked back, and there was Harry, trudging along with his pack. I was so happy to see him. He threw his pack in and helped push. That evening, we had a big bonfire and did a lot of visiting. Here is Harry with the first bunch of grapes he ever picked from a vineyard near Auburn. Two days later, we were in Sacramento and stayed in the YMCA there. Thought the Capitol and grounds were beautiful, so I took a couple of pictures. While we were hiking along near Roseville with the cart, a train came by, and we saw a young man waving frantically at us. Later, we learned it was our cousin Clifford Hubbs from New York State, who we were to meet in San Francisco and go to the fair with. Finally, after 6 months and 6 days, on October 17, 1915, we got to the World's Fair in San Francisco. We met our cousin Clifford Hubbs at the post office. The Tower Jewels. I took this picture with my Brownie box camera. The other World's Fair slides are ones I made from postcards. A night scene showing the light beams, which we thought were beautiful and very impressive. Here we are pulling the cart into the Columbia Park Boys Club, where we left it. Notice that we had taken the signs off of the cart. Harry and I each kept one of the signs. We all stayed here at the club while in San Francisco, including Max and Liam. This is a picture of Oakland I took from the top of the City Hall. After obtaining permission from the police in both Oakland and San Francisco, we sold our hike postcards here in Oakland and with our cart at the post office in San Francisco, so as to make money to go to the fair with, and later for the train ride to Fresno. We systematically visited the fair with our cousin for 8 days and had a great time doing it. One of the scenes at the fair. We were particularly impressed with many of the exhibits, especially the machinery exhibit. Finally, we took the train to Fresno, where we met a cousin who was a teacher at the Fresno Normal School. She had a friend take us to Exeter, where we got work. Harry and I ran the East Side Dairy there while going to high school. However, after 2 years, Harry returned to Minnesota. I enlisted in the Navy and served 13 months during World War I. Mother and our sister Lillian moved to Exeter, and Mother bought this house there. She was county librarian for 25 years. Lillian and I were both graduated from Exeter High School, with the class of 1919. I met Grace Anderson at Exeter, and during mid-semester of my senior year at Santa Barbara College. We were married in Fresno, December 17, 1922. We came to Hanford from Santa Barbara the fall of 1923, in this, our Model T4. I was hired as woodwork instructor, which job I held for 39 years, retiring in 1962.